Welcome to this tour of the PySystemTrade repository on GitHub, a repository that, as I'm sure you're aware, was created by Rob Carver, aka Rob Carver 17. In this video, we will not delve into the specifics of trading systems or the intricate details of PySystemTrade. Instead, our sole focus will be navigating the GitHub interface. Everything visible on the screen right now. Personally, I've undergone an online Git bootcamp, yet I still find GitHub somewhat overwhelming. It feels like every part of the page is clickable, and there's a fair amount of specialized terminology to grasp. So join me as we navigate through the GitHub interface, exploring its various elements and understanding how they contribute to managing and collaborating on the PySystem project. One small disclaimer, I am determined to record this video in a single take, so apologies if there is any umming and ahhing during the tour, but let's begin. As we land on the main page of the PySystemTrade repository, or repo for short, we encounter here the collection of files and folders that are being actively managed within this codebase. These are the files continually updated and tracked as the project evolves. Within this repository structure, there's a crucial file named readme.md. The MD extension signifies that the file is formatted in markdown, which is a text formatting language. The README file holds special significance in GitHub repos. The contents of README are automatically displayed on the main page of the repository. You can see that if we scroll down a little. So we're greeted by the contents of the README file. This file often contains essential information about the project, including its purpose, usage guidelines, installation instructions, and so on. If you want to view the raw, unformatted version of the README file, we can click on it and select the button Raw. This presents the contents in the original unprocessed state, so probably what Rob saw when he was writing the README file in the first place. As I say, it's written in Markdown, and it uses special symbols to format text in a way that's displayed differently when rendered in a browser. For instance, a single hash symbol up here denotes a heading that will be displayed in a larger font size. So the word PySystemTrade, it will be displayed in big font. We can see that here. And if there's two hash symbols in a row, then it's a subheading. Still a large font, but not quite as large. And you can see that description, big font, not quite as big as PySystemTrade. And other symbols, just to mention, star symbols or dashes, they will be represented as a list, which is what you see here, bullet pointed list. So these are just some examples showcasing how specific symbols in a markdown file affect the way the content of that file appears when it's properly rendered. Returning now to the main page. In Rob's repository, there have been over 4,000 commits. You can see that here where my mouse is. You can think of a commit as an update or change that has been made to the project. And each commit represents a specific set of changes or additions that were made to the so-called code base. In Git, every commit is stored and remembered, allowing us to precisely trace the project's evolution from its initial stages to the present day. It forms a sequence. And if you were to follow that sequence of commits from the very first commit, then you would have a complete understanding of how it was Rob arrived at the current version of PySystemTrade. Each commit is accompanied by a concise message explaining the purpose of that commit, and what we're looking at here is a history of the commit, of the recent commits, and in bold you have the messages accompanying each commit. And you'll notice that the messages are written in the past. They're written in the present tense rather than the past tense. Fix net position error, merge with develop. So they're not written as merged with develop or fixed net position error. That's what you see here is the convention in Git. It encourages messages that directly state what the commit will accomplish. So if Rob was to decide to revert this project to an earlier commit, let's say he dropped it back down to this commit here, then we would immediately understand that if we were to proceed with the next commit, the effect of that would be to fix issue number 1254. Each commit is also assigned a commit hash, and I'm pointing to one of them here, which is a unique and peculiar looking identifier. We don't need to delve deeply into these commit hashes, but just know they do hold significance in Git, as they play a vital role in preserving the chronological order of commits. So the unique commit hashes are very important to maintaining the integrity of the project timeline. They ensure the sequence of commits could not be maliciously altered. In Git, Rob has the ability to navigate backwards in time within the project's history by referring to one of the commit hashes. So he could point towards a specific commit hash and effectively revert the project to an earlier state where all of the commits after that point have not actually been instituted. Scrolling back up to the top, so we're sitting in the commit history, but let me go back one to the main page. You can see here we are currently on the so-called master branch of PySystemTrade, which represents the live version of the project. It's the current version of the code base. To explore experimental changes without affecting the stability of the master branch, Rob can and has created alternate branches. I suppose one of them is called develop and the other is called drop Arctic. And these are separate environments for making and testing experimental changes to PySystemTrade. They are basically isolated spaces where changes can be implemented without affecting the master branch. And if those experimental changes prove successful, they can eventually be merged into the master branch, and thereby GitHub enables you to seamlessly merge your experimental features with the live version of your project. I'm going to click on the commit history again and point out that the very first commit took place on the 27th of November 2015. And it was called, and the message accompanying it was initial commit. I'm going to click on that. You can see that the initial commit involved the addition of two completely new files to the repository, one called license, the other called readme. And there's some other information here too. 677 additions and 0 deletions. Well, the additions is referring to the individual lines of code. So that there are 675 in the first file and another 2 in the second file, total of 677. Just so happens because these are brand new files, no lines were deleted, so we've got 0 deletions. There's some funny notation here, a bunch of @ symbols and some numbers and commas. It's not something we need to worry about really. This is basically a very a non-straightforward way of telling you where changes have occurred in the file. The first couple of numbers are zeros. It's telling us that there were no lines to begin with in the license file. And the second pair of numbers is saying there have been modifications to the lines between 1 and 675. The notation here is not really important to us because thanks to graphical interfaces like GitHub, which is what we're looking at here, we've got a much more user-friendly way of seeing what changes have been made. Anything highlighted green is an additional modification. If anything was highlighted red, it would signify a deletion. And you probably wouldn't even pay attention to this funny notation to begin with. PySystemTrade is not a simple project. Tracing steps from the very beginnings of the repository, the first commits, would provide a really valuable insight into its evolution. So that's something I'd like to do. I'd like to kind of follow Rob's footsteps one commit at a time, although that's an enormous undertaking, and witness the gradual expansion from its humble beginnings to what it is today. What I've just said there is a nice idea, but in practice, it's going to be really hard work. Let's have a look at the second commit. First commit, no test, docs or help. Okay, I've clicked on that. I'm just tidying up some of the structure of the file, the folder structure here on the left, just to make my explanation a bit simpler. You can see a whole bunch of files and folders have been added to the repository in this commit, and a mind-boggling number of new lines of code have been added, over 600,000. So this is going to take some effort on my part to follow and understand. Let's just have a look at one of the files that has been changed, a file that we're already familiar with from the first commit, license. You can see that GitHub is not repeating the whole file. You'll recall there were 675 lines. No, it's not doing that. It's just focusing in on the area where a change has been detected. You can see a highlighted couple of lines in red, something that was removed, and a highlighted green line, something that was added. It actually looks to me like the net effect of this change was just to delete one empty line, because the URL seems to be identical in either case. I'd also like to mention the requirements file that was added as part of this commit. Here it is. All of it's green, of course, because there was no file to begin with. It's all new. And the requirements file it's a common file that you'll find in Python repositories, and it's specifying the various dependencies that are required for this project to run on your machine. So in this case, you would need Python version 3.0 or greater and a bunch of additional libraries installed. The handy thing about a requirement file is that you can have your machine attempt to install all of these dependencies just by referring once to this requirements file. So you wouldn't necessarily need to manually track down and install individually one dependency after the other. I'm going to mention also this other new file that was added in this commit, setup.py. It's another common file in Python projects. It includes instructions for Python to follow as to how this project should be installed when an attempt is made to install it on somebody's machine. So it's a set of instructions. The funny thing is that in this commit, it's just a duplicate of the requirements file. That's unexpected, and I'm sure that in subsequent commits, Rob will have made serious amendments to this setup.py file. So that covers some of the files that are sitting in the root directory, but of course you can see in this commit there were additional folders and various subfolders that were also added, and there's so many of them that this is not the right video to wade through them. Something for another video, I think. But let's continue exploring GitHub at a high level. What else is interesting on this page? You have some options on the right hand side here, split or unified. This is giving us the option about how to display the changes that Rob made in this commit. So currently the changes to any given file are shown just as you see. So you've got one big block explaining what changes have been made to this particular file. But if you click on split, then you've got two blocks side by side. You've got the block showing how the file looked before the commit, and the block on the right showing how the file looks after the commit. It's whatever you prefer. I guess I think I prefer the split, but it does it probably requires more screen space, doesn't it, to be able to see everything clearly. And another option to mention here is whitespace versus ignore whitespace. Whitespace is telling GitHub that it's asking GitHub to highlight changes that were made that just merely involve white space, so spaces and tabs basically. And those changes might be so trivial that you might not really find them very interesting, in which case you could click on ignore white spaces. And just to give an example of what effect that will have a look at this. The file license was changed as a result of this commit. And you've got a couple of lines in red on the left before, and a new line in green on the right. But now ignore whitespace. And it's just that it's a bit simplified. Now it's just showing one white line was removed, really. So just something to be a visualization preference to be aware of. There's an awful lot to see and click on in GitHub. It's hard work to go through it all, but let's persevere, because once we've done it once, we'll be more comfortable in this environment forever. I mentioned commit hashes earlier, didn't I? And I just want to point out at this point that with this current commit, this was the second commit that Rob ever made. It has the commit hash here, but it also mentions here the parent commit hash. So this is the commit hash of the preceding commit. And the current commit hash incorporates whatever the parent commit hash was. So there's a mathematical process that governs this. And the next commit will also have a commit hash that will incorporate the current commit hash. So it forms a mathematically linked chain. And just going back to what I said earlier, these commit hashes are really important to maintaining the integrity of the timeline of events, the sequence of commits. Let's keep going. Notice up here there's a button, Browse Files. Browse the repository at this point in the history. This is kind of like a time machine. I like this button. I'm going to click it. Now we're taken to the main page, but it's as though we're stood in November 2015. You can see there's far fewer files and folders at this point, and the README file is just a couple of lines. There's nothing there. Okay, I'm going to go back to the commit history. I've just clicked on the most recent commit, and I'm going to focus on the three dots here that I didn't speak about before. There's not much here. We can view the file that has been changed. And here it is. And it's read-only, so don't bother trying to change it. And of course, there's an awful lot of other buttons worth talking about on this page. We're currently in code mode, so it's just showing the file without any annotations. But if we were to click blame, then we would see the same file, but now there's various annotations, and those annotations can help to understand which specific user was responsible for writing different sections of that file, or can provide some of the author's rationale behind why the file contains whatever it does. Why is the word blame used here? I did ask Google about that, and it seems the creators of GitHub did it they used that word in a humorous fashion. I guess the expectation is if you're delving into the background to one of the files in a GitHub repository, it might be that there's something that's gone wrong, and now you're trying to find out who to blame for whatever's gone wrong by looking at the annotations. By the way, there's another thing here to point out. For this particular file, there are 636 lines, but 509 LOC. There are only 509 lines of code, so the rest is just white space. Just pointing something out, just in case you were wondering. Okay, let's focus on this little section here. We know what raw does. It shows us the very raw format of the file. But there's a button here to copy, and this will just copy everything here. And if you're going to, I don't know, maybe you want to just quickly copy and paste it into some other area that you're working on, there's the option to download the raw file. And the options here I don't think are worth talking about in this video, frankly. And there's three dots up here again. Let's have a quick look. You can jump to line. So if this file has got hundreds or thousands of lines of code, this could be quite handy. You can jump straight to the line of code that you know you need to look at. There's another option to download the file here. And you can copy the path of this file, which is going to be this. It's going to be the path within the context of Rob's GitHub repository, or the permalink. And I just happen to know, because I've tested, that the permalink is the URL. Okay, I'm going to move back to the commit history, and I'm going to point something out. So just picking a random commit here, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's an opportunity to write a comment about this commit. So maybe there's something you don't like about it, or God knows, but there's an opportunity here to have a little discussion. I'm scrolling back up to the top, and yet again, there's some going back to the main page. There's some interesting clickable links here, and I'm going to say a few things about them, but even so, I don't have a great understanding of what this is. Tags. There are 3 tags, and as far as I can tell, tags are a way of labeling specific points, let's say momentous points in a project's history. So you might create a tag when you have just released the next big version of your project. And it seems that on 3 occasions, that's what Rob did. Version 1, version 1.2, version 1.31. But what I'm struggling to explain is version 1 was tagged in the year 2021, but we know this repository was being developed for several years before that. And we know actually that the latest version of PySystemTrade is more like 1.8 now. And we're in the year 2023, nearly in the year 2024. So I don't know if I don't know why the tags are only relating to these 3 different versions. Answers in the comments, please. Heading back to the main page. Along the right hand side, we've got some high level information about the project. You've got a clickable link to the README, the license file, but let's have a look at activity. What's that about? Okay, so this is very similar to the commit history. It's showing all of Rob's activity in this project. Interestingly, as far as GitHub is concerned, the only user listed in this section is Rob. But actually, if you do focus a bit more on each of the items of activity, they do refer to other users that are contributing. There, here. Who else? Well, I don't see anyone else on this page, but plenty of other users have contributed. So it's just interesting to me that GitHub doesn't pick up on those. It's just focusing on Rob here. So anyway, the activity page, it's showing more than just commits. It's showing a broader range of activity in this repository, such as the opening and closing of specific issues that might have been raised by other users. But mostly, I think the activity involving other users are pull requests. You see that time and again if you go through the pages, lots of pull requests. And basically, they are occasions when other users have requested changes to one or more files in Rob's repository. And if Rob likes the change, then he can commit it and actually make it a part of the live version of PySystemTrade. Heading back to that information area, 2,500 stars, also known as stargazers. Who are they? Well, this is just a way that other users can bookmark this repository, or they can simply show their appreciation for this repository. So it's kind of like liking a post on Twitter, I suppose. Back again to that information section, 165 watches. So this is a bit more serious than simply stargazing. This is where the user has gone a step further and actually wants to be notified about any activity on this repository. So this is kind of like clicking on subscribe. And interestingly, Rob Carver is watching his own repository. There are 772 forks. These are instances where other users out there in the world have created duplicates of PySystemTrade so that they can play around with a duplicate version. And I guess a lot of these forkers are people who have read Rob's books, and maybe they're trying to trade their own money using PySystemTrade. What I'm quite struck by is there's a lot of people here who are frequently updating their forks. I'm quite impressed by that. Right at the top, you've got bug or feature Andy, and he seems to have the most prominent fork. He's had 9 likes, and I happen to know that his version of PySystemTrade that he's working on is built to accommodate a spread betting platform, IG Index, I think. Okay, you might have noticed that when I clicked on forks, it actually took us to the insights section. So I'm just clicking insights to confirm that, and we're still forks are down here in this left-hand area. So besides forks, within the insights section, there's a few other options for us to look at. Let's see. One of them is the network, which is a way of visualizing different branches. All I want to say here is I just want to point out that GitHub is just one way of collaborating with others on Git-based projects, but there are other options out there, and many of them are free, that have much fancier graphical interfaces and much more impressive looking timelines. And one of them that springs to mind is called Git Kraken. Let's click on Get Code Frequency. What's going on there? Well, it's a chart showing additions and deletions, and judging by the y-axis, this must be additions and deletions of lines of code. And it seems like there are short, sharp bursts occasionally during the year when absolutely tons of lines of code are added or deleted. I'm a little bit puzzled by this, actually. You'll see why in a moment. If I click on commits, then it's showing me the number of commits week by week during this year. And it just seems to me that Rob has been doing a very slow and steady number of commits on a consistent basis. It does not give me the impression that it's just once in a blue moon Rob is adding thousands and thousands of lines of code. The only explanation I've got as to why this graph paints a seemingly very different picture to the commits graph is maybe it is once in a blue moon that Rob adds a huge number of lines of code in a single commit, and that most of the rest of the time he's just tweaking a few lines here and there, and you actually can't even see those commits because the number of lines of code is so few. I'd like to mention a side note here. I came across the concept of atomic commits. It's the notion that each commit should focus on one particular change to a project, because that makes it easier for others to comprehend what a sequence of commits is doing. But evidently, it's not really feasible to always adhere to that approach, because for one thing, in the beginning, Rob needed to get this project off the ground, didn't he? So his second commit added over 600,000 lines of code. That certainly was not an atomic commit. That will take a huge amount of effort on my part or anyone else's part to go through and understand what happened in that commit. What about community standards? It's sort of checklist for projects on GitHub, and PySystemTrade is ticking some but not all of them, and I guess it's just because some of these are overkill for this particular project. How about contributors? Well, there's a lot of contributors we're going to see in a moment. They're listed here by the number of commits that they have contributed towards. I'm really impressed by how many active contributors there have been. because it takes a fair bit of knowledge to actually have something worthwhile to contribute, I would say. I'm gonna focus in on, let me just pick at random here. T Gibson, 150 commits. I'm clicking on that to see his commits. And it's saying, you can see here, various changes have been made, and the changes were committed. There was something that disturbed me about this when I saw this. I thought, wow, are each of these contributors authorized to directly make their own commits as they see fit to PySystemTrade? Surely that can't be right. But I mean, when I'm looking at this page, or indeed the main commit history, it never ever says anything about a pull request or the commit having to be approved first by Rob. But I did actually figure out that whenever somebody else, seemingly another contributor, seemingly has made a commit, that has actually arisen as a result of them firstly making a pull request. So alerting Rob, here are some changes I'd like to make. And then Rob actually reviews the changes. Only then do they proceed towards actually being added to the project, in which case they have the status of committed. I imagine this collaborative system could be, on the one hand, really annoying for Rob, and on the other hand, very useful. I know from personal experience, if you've got multiple authors on the same document, you can end up in a muddle. For instance, the README file, page 1. There's obviously been some changes made over the years. PySystemTrade is a ... which implements all the optimization and system design principles in the book and on my website and in my books. And I also chuckled that books, Rob's various books, belong in quotation marks, as though maybe they're not quite books. Are they pamphlets? It just goes to show, when you've got lots of cooks in the kitchen, muddles like this can arise. But on the other hand, it's very difficult for one person, Rob, alone, to all on his own back push this project forward. So I can imagine if there are some really high quality contributors, they could supercharge the growth of PySystemTrade. Continuing the tour, we've looked at the insights page, but what about security? Well, this is a section which has nothing going on in PySystemTrade, but usually you might find a security.md file, and that would just provide documentation relating to security aspects for the project. For example, guidance about how to report vulnerabilities in the project, or what steps to undertake to fix vulnerabilities, or contact details. If you find some security related concern, who do you go to? I guess this page is probably better suited to really sensitive commercial projects and is overkill for PySystemTrade. What about the wiki section though? Wiki provides a place in your repository to lay out the roadmap of your project, show the current status, and document software better together. I did a bit of research about this section. It's also a really good place to host your guidance or tutorials for your repository. So I've got a question for Rob here. He's decided not to use this wiki feature. Instead, his tutorials, as you can see here, his tutorials reside within just markdown documents in the codebase itself. And I'm just wondering, might there be advantages to lifting and shifting his tutorials into the wiki section? I don't know. What about the project section? It is intriguing based on its description, but it remains unused in this repository. It's a section that offers guidance and features for organizing and managing tasks. I I'm wondering again if since PySystemTrade is not a commercial project, it's primarily managed by Rob. It's not like there are 10 full-time developers on it. Maybe this is overkill, but who knows? One day maybe PySystemTrade will have so many high-quality contributors that it will necessitate kind of a more structured way of managing the work, what work is to be done next, and I guess that would happen in this project section. Actions section. So it introduces a powerful automation tool. I've seen it described as a programmer. This section provides a programmable robot that automates repetitive tasks. Usually that would be triggered when you make changes to the code in the project. For example, if new code is added to the project, then the GitHub actions can be programmed to test the updated code against a predefined set of tests. And if they pass the tests, it indicates the new code hasn't broken anything. And actions, as far as I can tell, actions are formulated as jobs. Clicking on one here, jobs, which are individual tasks that are defined in a workflow file, and each job represents a series of actions or steps that are really important to the project's development process. So if the job is called build 3.8, maybe that involves testing the ability of testing whether this code base will successfully compile using Python 3.8, given that some changes have been made to the code base. I'm not exactly sure that. I'm just speculating. I'm not too familiar with these jobs. Discussions section is a space where users can engage in conversations about the project. It's quite active. And what about the issues section? It's a centralized space for tracking tasks or bugs or specific enhancements that should be made to the project. So really the emphasis here is specific, well-defined, actionable changes that should be made. So it's different from discussions. Discussions is more to do with broader conversations beyond specific actionable issues, but I bet from time to time users might be posting in issues when they should be posting in discussions and vice versa. I guess the lines can get a bit blurred at times. And finally, the pull request section. So I've spoken about pull requests a bit. This is where you can see the changes that have been recommended by other users besides Rob, or so-called contributors. And there are currently 3 recommended changes, but there are over 500 pull requests that have been closed. So somebody makes a pull request, Rob reviews it, and he'll close it one way or another. So if he likes the change, then he will merge it with the live code base, gets approved and committed. If he doesn't like it, it gets rejected, and I suppose it gets a cross next to it. So I think we've covered a lot of ground there, and I'm going to call it a night.